The short grasses native to the edge of the Badlands were like kindling to the whooshing rain of warp-fire rockets. The rich purple and black armours of the Chaos Army shone green amid the conflagration for the short time it lasted. There on that open field, the Chaos Gods got to see why their cousin, the Great Horned Rat, was so smug. Thousands of veteran peons were burned in those flames, although as many more pushed on toward the gauntlet of Gatling guns and golden shields waiting for them. There had been a little consternation about the possibility of weapons enhanced with chaotic magic not working against agents of chaos. Chaos simply didn't work like that, and indeed the various gods were happy enough to kill each other's mortal pets with little to no prompting. More concerning to see was a great cannon bringing up the chaos rear. No engineer was truly scared of just a cannon, for they knew its weaknesses as well as its strengths. It was the crew that sank the stomachs of Uldor's scouts, a Dawi crew. Or not, as no Dawi in service of chaos was a Dawi true. They were Jar, fallen dwarves, those who felt the pulling and binding that entrapped the Umgi so easily. Perhaps 40 were there, chanting spells to their cannon. Now and again it belched out a bolt of violet plasma summoned from the Chaos realm, which travelled with a squealing whistle before exploding among the Atalan line. 2 gyrocopters came down from high to ambush this cannon amid the action. While the clatterguns would suffice to dispatch the Jar, a few thunderers demanded to be let down to the ground to sate their anger. This was allowed, and within moments the Jar were being shot to pieces at close range by heavily armed shock troopers. However, there are certain advantages to pledging yourself to the Chaos Gods, first among them being the protection of powers that run deep into the fabric of reality itself. Such a power displayed itself, as if stepping from behind invisible curtains, a dozen towering warriors in black armour were suddenly standing before the Dawi. Their long swords were aglow with that violet energy, and their faces were concealed by their helmets, but for the light of burning eye sockets flickering through the gaps. Perhaps 20 Dawi were cut down, and the gyrocopters made a hasty retreat. The warriors watched the machines fly away, and saw too that the battle nearby was almost over. The Chaos Army had broken on the Dawi lines in a disorganized mess and been wiped clean away. Taking note of what they could, the warriors faded away once again. After inspecting the bodies and taking armor samples for testing, Uldor's force left the bloody field to attend to the exhausted Eight Peaks dwarves sheltering to their rear. These old warriors had seen and heard the fireworks. They had felt the tension in the air ease as the Chaos Gods grumpily turned their gaze from their slaughtered pawns. They could barely bring themselves to grunt out their thanks. Dorin, though, managed a more convincing display. He stepped down from his throne to level himself with the Engineer King. "Nothing less than the will of the gods," he mused shakily. Uldor clapped him on the shoulder, saying, "My lord, we'd like to ease the burden on our baggage train by expending some more ammunition. I trust you can show us the way to Karak 8 Peaks from here." Dorin nodded. "It's behind the fold of the nearest edge of the range there. And so I fear is the host of their dragon ogres, beasts with hammers as wide as a tavern door. Makes short work of our vaults. He might be at 8 Peaks already." "Are you joking?" Story interjected. "You're here when your Karak still stands? What corner do you think you were running off to? You should be inside those vaults as we speak." "You've a strange way of spewing your insults, Longbeard," Dorin said with little conviction. "Atalan Dorf, our shared ancestors, must be truly ancient. Having heard so much of the Eternal Empire at World's End, I must say I expected better. Sorry to disappoint, little one. However, the times are quite extraordinary, as I'm sure one of your learned nature has not failed to notice, "Enough," Uldor said. "If things have been going wrong so far, I've got news. We're here now. To 8 Peaks on the double. If you don't mind taking point, Lord Ironhammer. Dorin took his leave and had his remaining host reorganized. With Uldor's convoy in tow, they retraced their steps to collect the bodies of those slain in their flight. The trail led to an underway half a day closer to the mountains, where the Chaos Army had been lying in wait. The dwarves passed this entrance by to approach Karakate Peaks overland, hoping to surprise any besieging force there from behind. Yet they were seen coming from the high mountains as soon as they left that distant battlefield, and there to meet them at the base of the first rising hills was the master of the dragon ogres, the hammer of the gods, the arch-beast, Kolek Suneater. From a four-legged body as large as a landcrawler, his torso towered up, with arms gripping a maul with reach to kill a company of foes in a single sweep. His purple armor was being overgrown by his fur from within, and his eyes seeped a blue mist from his three-horned helmet. To his flanks were crowds of lesser dragon ogres, similarly armed and armoured. They were less than 50, but their force likely had the weight advantage on the dwarves. Still, after the success of the warp-fire rockets that morning, Uldor was happy to deploy at once and attempt to repeat the trick. Indeed, Kolek and his cadre were not ones for tactics, and trotted towards the dwarves from the front. The Eight Peaks dwarves were invited to watch the rocketeers closely as they made their calculations, then fired off their payloads. The green-spewing rockets fizzed down over the ogres and blasted out their plumes of warp fire. Perhaps that would be that. It wasn't. Through the smoke the ogres trotted on, speeding up. The warp fire was burning brightly across their bodies, melting away pieces of armor, but not penetrating their hides. Dragon ogres were not mere animals. They were protected by chaotic magic, as empowered to strike with their Goliath hammers as they were to endure searing heat. Now then, a line of dragon ogres, heavy with green flame and black smoke, lunged into a gallop, growing close and large together, and beginning to let out their furious roars between sharpened fangs. "Get your axes ready!" Uldor called out to his sides, sharing a nod with Dorin, who pulled a bejeweled pick from the arm of his throne. Everything began to fire. The landcrawler cannons were potent enough to tear through the smaller ogres, although their shots thumped off the bigger ones and made them angrier. Bullets tore into the beasts, spilling blood but not halting their charge. The Golden Guard clustered bravely right in their path, presenting a roof of shields that clattered as the ogre hammers fell. With pushes and sweeps, the dwarves were removed from their places, spinning through the air while dispensing hails of insults. Only by the merits of their fine armor were the majority of the guards not killed in those opening moments. Then the Eight Peaks dwarves found themselves in the way of the careening ogres. Their crossbows clacked out bolts. Where rifles had failed, they were unlikely to succeed, although they offered a single advantage. The bolts were heavier than rifle shot, so getting a volley of them stuck all over a dragon ogre's body did more to slow them down and keep them off balance. And still the rifles were not silent, nor the Gatling guns. A constant barrage began to take its toll on the ogres. The small half of the horde lay dead, with the larger half beginning to sway and lose any semblance of accuracy in their lumbering swipes. A few warp-fire rockets were loosed at close range, and while the flames themselves seemed ineffective, the percussive shock of the blasts broke bones and shook ailing minds. At short range, the Stone Melter solution could be employed too, bubbling through thick hides to expose weak flesh for the gunners to pummel. The brief and shocking battle eased as quickly as it had ramped up. Only Kolek resisted further, cleaving 20 Dawi at once into the air with swings of his sparking hammer. He couldn't be kept still long enough to pinpoint a weakness, running up and down the liquid line. Uldor thought for a moment, then signalled something to the landcrawler crews. Engines whined up to full power, and the tanks suddenly charged Kolek, circling around to come at him from all directions. The dragon ogre found his legs and feet pinned. He couldn't push his way out. His arms were high enough to be free, so he swung his hammer down on the landcrawler in front of him. It rang against the armour, and a fire burst out in the engine. By the time Kholek raised his mighty hammer again, it was too late. In this moment of stillness, he had drawn the fire of the whole army. Stone melter solution opened up his chest. Gatling gun barrages tore at his face and shattered his teeth. Bolts burrowed into his thinning hide. And of course the forward guns of the landcrawlers fired at point-blank range into his legs and stomach, exploding organs and filling his belly with searing hot fragments of stone and metal. Even for a champion of the Chaos Gods, this was too much. Conquering the mortal realm required bowing to the rules of mortality, after all. Kholek's twitching body slumped down as 4 of the landcrawlers pulled back. The other had to be taken apart and removed in pieces thanks to the damage of the sundering hammer. The Dwarven host had come away with remarkably few killed, albeit with their armour and weapons in abysmal condition. They would not be able to fight again, and thankfully they needn't. Ironhammer led a slow march around the nearest mountain, and within a day Karak 8 Peaks was visible. There had been a chaos encampment outside, now empty and damaged by fire. The guards at the Karak's high gate rejoiced at the sight of their lord not only returning, but alongside an army larger than that he had left with. Unfortunately for those waiting nervously below, few of these were 8 Peaks natives. The Karak was in terrible condition, all told. Battles had been fought above and below. It was a site always plagued by greenskins and Skaven even before the end times. Thankfully, these latter threats had departed in anticipation of the genocidal conquest of Chaos. The dwarves, far too stubborn for such caution, were miraculously vindicated now that the threat had been rebuffed. Although, it should be clarified, it was no miracle, it was engineering. While work went on restoring the surface defences, Dorin Ironhammer called Uldor down to the Grand Hall for an audience. Some makeshift barricades had been hastily cleared away to make room for a modest feast. At the head of the wide table, Dorin beckoned Uldor closer and spoke quietly. "So, engineer, how much time do you think we have?" he asked. "Erring on the side of caution, however long it takes a Chaos army to get from the horizon to here," Uldor replied, matter-of-factly. "You think they'll come again?" "Aye, such is their way." "And you'll defeat them again, won't you?" "That you should stake nothing on whatsoever. Oh, don't get me wrong, me and the boys could hold this Karak until we wither, no doubt about it. But there's a world outside the Karak, eh? You're here now, though, why not stay? Together we could rebuild and make that, you know, your seed for the new world, that thing you used to talk about." "We've already got one of those, Lord," Story cut in. "Sorry, the boat quite literally sailed on that one," Kazran added from the other side of the table, with a mouth more than half full. "So what, you've installed me here just to perish?" Dorin complained. Uldor shook his head. "You're here to make sure that everyone collects together all of their things, and walks in a calm but quick fashion right down the underway, far as it goes out south by southwest. That's where the living will make their stand. In the land of the dead, funnily enough." "What's funny about that?" "You had to be there, Lord," Kazran quipped. "That's it then?" "Aye, I'll give you captains to help hold the rear. Buy more time," Uldor said. Dorin drank deeply and stewed for a while. Then he said, "And where shall you go?" "Wherever we can do good. Could be Umgi alive. More Dawi to the north. I had hoped to reach Karaz Ankor." "You're far too late for that," Dorin quickly said. "Most places..." He leant closer to Uldor. "Most places decided to bring their survivors to Barak Var. You gave them ideas. They wanted to sail away and find you. And they're still there." "Heard nothing since a month at least. Thorgrin's there, I think." "King Thorgrin." Sorry. Listen to yourself, coming back from your jolly and correcting my manners." "Just one of our many services, my lord," Story snarked. "Barak Var, a port, isn't it?" "Aye, the port that furnished our departure before," Uldor said. "A fine place to get more dowie away from this madness. So, Lord Ironhammer, I trust you'll handle the evacuation here. Find anyone you can and send them out. We've sentries in the underway waiting. Muster all you can to seal the entrances. It's a month at least to the other end. We'll bolster Barak Var, do what we can, and come back here to meet you." "Oh, I have to wait for you to come back." "No use you being the very first to leave, is it, Lord?" Kazran said. In other times he would be in dire trouble on account of his running mouth. That evening, though, Ironhammer was shamed into silence. Uldor's host stayed at the Carrack a few days, and contributed their machines and expertise to the defence works. Below, the evacuations were already starting, with rangers heading out to mark the safe route in the underway with lamps and ropes. Above, Doran's army was merged with a few recruits scraped together to hold the rear. The evacuation would be slow, mostly on foot, although by then so many of the Carrack's living population were refugees from elsewhere that it meant few personal possessions were brought along to weigh down the carts. Some of Uldor's troops stayed to help, many of them Atalan natives, hoping to catch more glimpses of the eternal Dwarven Empire before it faded from history entirely. Soon the army was in the underway again, heading northwest towards the stem of the Black Gulf and the seaward citadel of Barak Var. The expedition was coming full circle, and Uldor was excited to bring the Barak Var locals the fruits of their labour. There were refugees in the underway heading that way too. They attached themselves to the rear of the army, or accepted invitations back to Eight Peaks. Spirits were rising, and the organised response to the complete annihilation of the mortal realm brought a great sense of ease to those who knew only despair for months prior. Such spirits were tested by the fiery hellscape the Black Gulf coast had become. Chaos was there already, roaring on the surface, rumbling in the deeps, spanning the physical and illusory without distinction. Uldor would truly come to wonder in those days whether his departure had done more harm than good. A cackling doubt crescendoed as he met fleeing survivors coming from the tunnels ahead.